Oh, we always got to start off with a laugh. Welcome to the Mr. Teacher, Mr. Preacher YouTube channel and podcast, where it is our mission to learn what lasts in athletics and teach and preach it back to you, whether you're an athlete, parent, coach, or somebody in between. I am Kevin. That is Jake. We are grateful to be here with you. We are on our series of cooperation. That is the fifth and final foundational building block within John Wooden's Pyramid of Success. And this book, or this deep read, is focused on reclaiming conversation because, according to our first read, Group Genius, conversation is the engine of cooperation and group flow. So we got to learn, how do we reclaim conversation in order to be more successful in a broader term. That is where we're at. That is where we're going. Jake, it is great to see you. I will pass it over to you to kick us off right, as always, and we will jump in.
Awesome. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time again. You brought us back another week, and thank you for Kevin and the friendship and the desire that you have given him to seek truth, seek understanding, seek how to better himself and make the world for those around him better. Thank you for the audience and their desire to seek out truth and understanding and how to be better themselves. I pray that you would bless this time, that it would be edifying to all who hear it, and it would be edifying to those who speak it as well. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Hoorah. All right. We need like a clap thing. You know how you break a huddle? We need one of those. All right, Jake, focusing the reader. I want to draw people in with a little bit of tension between a few things. It'll help us go forward about conversation and cooperation. And I'm going to ramble a little bit, but not so much. One of the first things, there's this phrase, I'm going to get it wrong. It's anamnesis, which is remembering what we forgot. Jamie Wheel of the Flow Genome Project is famous for talking about this, remembering who we truly are. And I want to bring that down to our humanity and contrast that with what's going on with technology. So C.S. Lewis, very famous writer, Chronicles of Narnia, among others, said in a short-winded way that we are far too easily satisfied. We settle for the junk food of the world and don't really realize the beauty and the goodness of the great things. We settle for good when there's great. And that is pervasive amongst our relationships. If conversation is the engine to more cooperation and our ability to work together, we are settling for what is artificial and easy through our technology, specifically our phones, at a time when our attention and our time and our presence are the most valuable commodities we have. If you want to say you love somebody, show up fully. I mean, no distractions, no interruptions, no nothing. The quote was from Elaine de Botton, and I know I'm jumping around, but it was so heartbreaking, and this book broke me in a lot of ways as I was reading. It said at the beginning of the romance chapter of all things, true love is a lack of desire to check one's smartphone in another's presence. Elaine de Botton. And I want to add one more thing. I just had to make sure we are remembering what we forgot on 116, which said, my mom has forgotten how to talk. I kind of feel the reason why so many of us keep using our phones, even though it takes us away from meaningful conversations, is that some people have kind of forgotten how to have a really good conversation because they've used their phone so long that they really don't know what else to do but text. It gets awkward talking in front of people. They haven't done that. I think they really just don't know what to do. So we're out of practice. That's an issue. And yet at the same time, to continue this contradiction and pass it to you, I think I got the right page. Why do we forget something as simple as conversation? Again, technology makes us forget what we know about life. So I want to pass that to you is that face-to-face encounters, presence. How do you rectify this in your own life or just what you've seen? I told you before we were recording that we've really lived through this book because we were the kind of as technology came out, especially phones, we saw this. So we know what it was like before. I think we were old enough where technology is just a tool to get us together. And then it kind of shifted. And now our generation that we are coaching or raising doesn't know that difference. So what do you think about remembering what we forgot? Love, attention, time, uninterrupted, undistracted, and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's all true. I think it's really good context to have that we live through this transition in a very intimate way. Even in the early stages of phones or cell phones where you could communicate instantly with someone, like you still had T9 texting. So it would still, like, even if you had to say no, you still had to be pretty deliberate about how many buttons you pushed to do it. So yeah, we had it, but it's not something that you would rely on to communicate because it would give you arthritic thumbs real fast. And nowadays you got the keyboard, you can just swipe along your phone. It's got smart texting. It's predicting what you're about to say. So now you can talk to text, right? There's a lot of different ways to make it more convenient. So we kind of lived through all the phases of that. And thankfully, I think when we were in our early, more, what's the word, moldable years, it was still tough for us to text so quickly. So I think it staved off that's the only way we communicate. It's so true though. For me, I've tried to pinpoint why I'm addicted to it or why I have to pull it out. I think for me is just always having an answer for everything at my fingertips. And I think this has come out in a lot of ways in society, but for me, it's that as someone who loves knowledge and wants to learn everything, and it's like, oh, I could just pull my phone out, boom, I'd have an answer in 10 seconds. Problem is that will then lead down one rabbit trail, which leads to another rabbit trail, which leads to checking the scores of the football games, which leads to checking my fantasy team. The next thing you know, 30 minutes has gone by and my kids are just kind of staring at me like, hey, Dad, what you doing? So I'd say that's the biggest challenge for me, is finding that just having information at the tip of my fingers all the time is a really hard pull for me. For other people, I think that has become their prime way of being connected with others, whether it's social media, whether it is texting. I often marvel, I'll see like screenshots of people and they'll have like 215 unread text messages. What in the world is going on? Like, how many of those people do you actually really know or talk with? And why are that many people what are they wanting from you? It's a very bizarre thing that has moved on in society, and hopefully this conversation will lead to some different ways of solving it, and if nothing else, just an awareness of how much a part of our lives it is, because I think oftentimes we don't realize really how, I will use this word, ridiculous technology has become in terms of how we're communicating and interacting with humans.
Yeah. And as we move to the first draft reading here, there were twos, the king of twos, too much work, too hard, easier to this. I mean, it's just, we take the easy button. And I know we covered the comfort crisis way back in the beginning. We are just so inundated with taking what's right in front of us. And that's a good transition. So what is this book about? So it's called Reclaiming Conversation, The Power of Talk in a Digital Age by Sherry Turkle. Get it on bookshop.org, wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever suits you best. But in the beginning, this is the basic premise of the book right out of the chutes. It says, face-to-face conversation is the most human and humanizing thing we do. Fully present to one another, we learn to listen. It's where we develop the capacity for empathy. It's where we experience the joy of being heard, of being understood, of being accepted. All great things. So we aren't going to spend this episode, I told this to Jake as we were talking about this book in this episode, not decrying where we are currently at. I think that other people have already gone much farther in that route. We want to focus on solutions, but we do need to build a context of the problem in order for us to be like, oh, that's actually a thing. So I want to start there. and talk about a few things. So just for your entertainment's sake, Jake, there's some funny things, and I want to get to the most. So some stories and stats, and then I'm going to give you some ingredients that showed up throughout the book about conversation, have you pick your favorite words. But before we get to that, let's do some stories and stats. So the first one is this rule of 3. I didn't know this was a thing, and I grew up through this time, but it's this idea that if 3 other people are at your table or in your group are checking their phones, it gives you permission to check yours. So you can kind of scan, and if other people are up and down, bobblehead, you can do it. The 40% is in the past 20 years. This book was written in 2015. We've seen a 40% decline in the markers for empathy among college students. That's when we were in college. Okay, that is not insignificant. There's also this thing called the Goldilocks effect, where we can't get enough of each other if we can have each other at a digital distance. Not too close, not too far, just right. But as I'm going to get to in a moment, human relationships are rich, messy, and demanding. So, Jake, here's some of the most heart-wrenching quotes. I'm going to give you a job. I'm going to read it to you. Tell me how sad, severe, heartbreaking said thing is, okay? Let's play that game.
Be morbid, okay?
Most endangered. Okay, this is the most endangered quote. The most endangered kind in which you listen intently to another person. This is the conversation. And expect that he or she is listening to you. Where a discussion can go off on a tangent and circle back. Where something unexpected could be discovered about a person or idea. And there are losses of conversation. In person, we have access to the messages carried in the face, the voice, and the body. Online, we get a simpler fare. We get our efficiency and our chance to edit. But we learn to ask questions that a return email can answer. So how depressing is that endangered species of conversation?
Yeah, very. So very.
Well, no,
What I think, well, I'll come back to as a coach eventually, maybe not right now, but is this idea of nonverbal communication, how important it is.
I would agree. What number would you give that?
You said 10 was super sad?
10 is super sad.
What's going to be tough? I mean, 8. I'll go 8.
Hey. We'll go with that one. The most emotional connection. So this is right after that. The idea that we are living in moments of more and lives of less. God, I love that phrase. Is supported by a recent study in which pairs of college-age friends were asked to communicate in 4 different ways. Face-to-face conversation, video chat, audio chat, and online instant messaging. The results were clear after they were graded on their degree of emotional bonding in these friendships. The in-person conversations led to the most emotional connection, and online messaging led to the least. I would suggest to you that we know which of those ones are used the most and which ones are the least. So how depressing is that to you, or sad, when you hear that in-person conversations are the most emotionally connecting but the least used?
It's incredibly sad. It's incredibly sad. I mean, I just think of the movement now of, look, I love the convenience of working from home, but you ain't talking to people in person when you're working from home, especially not your coworkers. And so what does that lead to? So I'll put that as a 9.
Doesn't get better. In the new communications culture, the most common phrase, this is a good one, interruption is not experienced as interruption, but as another connection. So when we get interrupted, so you're in a group, somebody looks at their phone, so it's just one more connection to them. Only half joking, people in their teens and 20s tell me that the most commonly heard phrase at dinner with their friends is, wait, what? Everyone is always missing a beat. The time it takes to find an image or send a text.
I mean, it's a 9 too. Wait, what?
Wait, what?
What happened?
Is that Macklemore? That's a Macklemore epidemic. What?
Yeah.
What?
I mean, for me, the tough part is I have 5 kids, so interruption is no, it really is interruption. It's not a connection to another bridge. It's an interruption.
The most painful thing, Jake, is to watch is that they, students in this case, don't know when they have hurt each other's feelings. They hurt each other, but then you sit down with them and try to get them to see what has happened. And they can't imagine it from the things from the other side. My students can build websites, but they can't talk to teachers. And students don't want to talk to other students. They don't want the pressure of conversation.
That almost seems like two different things to me, but yeah, that's a 10. Not having any empathy is a terrifying thought in society.
The one quote a little earlier was parents wonder if cell phones leads to Asperger's syndrome because it deprives words, eye contact, and expressions. Because if you don't get those, you become stiff and unresponsive to others. I digress. Jake, let's go. These don't need scores now, but I do want a shot to the heart here, so everybody can feel more or less where we're at. And this could be any context. I don't want it just to be one context. It could just let me read it, and I'll read both, and you can kind of tell me what you think. So, children from the earliest state ages complain about having to compete with smartphones for their parents' attention. This is was hard to read. At dinner, a 5-year-old girl cajoles, "Mommy, please, you promised. You had 5 minutes before," when her mother's phone vibrates for the third time. An 8-year-old boy gets up from the table and tugs at his mother's sleeve when she takes out her phone during the meal. "No, not now, not now," he pleads. As she turns her back to her child, the mother says, "Mommy has to make a quick call." This boy returns to his chair, sullen. Page 109, the missing chip hypothesis from a teenager. Yeah, so my mom is always on her email, always on her phone, and she always has it next to her at the dinner table. And if there's the slightest little buzz or anything, she'll look at it. She always has some excuse. When we are out to dinner, she'll pretend to put it away. She'll have it on her lap. She'll be looking down, but it'll be so obvious. Me and my dad and my sister will tell her all the time to get off her phone. If I were to even be on my phone at the table, I would get grounded by her. But she has her phone out. At dinner, my mom is doing her own thing on her phone, and it ends up my dad is sitting there, I am sitting there, my sister is sitting there, and no one is talking or anything. It's a chain reaction. Only one person has to start. Only one person has to stop talking.
This would be one that I'm guilty of, big time. This is the one that my wife gets on me all the time. Gets on me, that's not the right way to put it. Reminds me, we have a lot of conversations about this and how kids are perceiving what we're doing. Talk about empathy. This would be a good place to practice it. To us, yes, we're just checking one or two things. To them, you would rather be somewhere else than with them. Like that's how they're perceiving it.
Yep.
And that's a massive thing. And I'll take this to another place. I spend my time at a lot of fields with a lot of parents watching soccer games. Okay. The games aren't so bad, but like practice, it is amazing to me. You'll just walk and everybody will be looking at a device.
Yep.
It's an iPad, it's an iPhone, it's their cell phone, it's something. Not paying any attention to their kid playing, having fun, what's being worked on. But then they'll show up to the game when they actually watch, they're confused and frustrated by what's going on.
Yep.
Like to me, that's very indicative of kind of the parent-coach relationship, right? And to say that they don't see it or they're busy, so they're not seeing you on your phone, I think is shortchanging your kid. Right? The amount of times mine looks at me while practice is going on is a lot. Now I'm not necessarily paying attention to everything he does because I'm kicking the ball around with somebody else, but I think that might be the most important thing that comes out of this is for parents to really engage with their kids more often, because now that I've just opened my eyes to it, the amount of times that I see kids just get put to the back burner or put as second fiddle in a lot of ways, it's really heartbreaking to watch.
Yeah, and I don't want to build that habit loop of they want my attention, they don't get it, they go somewhere else to get it. On repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. So to transition to that, I do want to read this because it'll take us to the ingredients of conversation. And this is exhaustive, but I want to read this because you put it in my plate very well. It says, it is not enough to ask your children to put their phones away. You have to model this behavior and put your phone away. If children don't learn how to listen, to stand up for themselves and negotiate with others in classrooms or family or sports, in our case, when will they learn the give and take that is necessary for good relationships, or for that matter, for the debate of citizens in democracy? Way bigger than we're talking. Reclaiming conversation begins with the acknowledgement that speaking and listening with attention are skills. They can be taught. They take practice, and that practice can start now in your home, in your classroom, at your job, on your team, everywhere. So, Jake, do you have anything handy to write with next to you?
Yeah, hang on.
Okay. So here's what I'm going to do for Jake as he gets ready. There's an exercise in the deeper reading model by Kelly Gallagher called the ingredients list. And usually you can do this for a character in terms of, what ingredients make up said character from that point of view. We're going to look at ingredients from another angle. We're going to look at ingredients that conversation gives rise to. So, Jake, I'm going to give you 4 passes at this. These are all the ingredients as I was reading that showed up that appear in conversation. So we talked about there's a problem, right? I mean, we need more conversation. We need to also talk about, before we get into solutions, what do we get, right? You got to kind of know the carrot just as much as you need the stick, is kind of how I was playing this. So, Jake, I want you to write, as I read ingredients, the ones that stand out most to you. So what about conversation in our context, either do you personally find really valuable or stick out, or ones that just like, ooh, that's good. Okay. So I'm gonna read the first list and the second list, and then we'll talk, and I'll read the third and fourth, and we'll talk. Okay. So what are the ingredients of conversation? Write down ones you like. First is eye contact, listening, attention to others, empathy, connected, creative, fulfilled, stand up for oneself in that case, negotiate, volume, and velocity. List number 2, continuing, pay attention, imagination, uncomfortable, imperfect, trust, practice, commitment, compassionate, crazy, inefficient, embarrassing, open-ended. So of the first 2 long ingredients lists, all of those things happen when we have real face-to-face, non-device conversation. What stood out to you, and what do you think is valuable of that? I mean, it all is, but what'd you like?
I mean, the first one made me laugh. Eye contact. It makes me laugh because it's one of the awkward things in face-to-face conversations, where it's like you have somebody that will just stare a hole through your soul while you're talking to them, and then you'll have the people that you can clearly tell are uncomfortable, and their eyes are just wandering everywhere to try and get them out of the conversation. And so it's not something that I judge per se. It's just something that I have picked up over life, of just watching people's eye contact or paying attention to it during a conversation, which is,
dude, I love to make people uncomfortable with eye contact now. I used to be kind of divert out of like respect, like I didn't want to be creepy. Now I just live in that space. It's like, I'm going to give you my full attention and not let you squeeze. Like, you can watch people try and squeeze out of the eye contact, and they can't do it because they know they're stuck. It is the funniest thing I think I've seen. So I do it not to be mean, but like how rare that is. And I made a note to that with some kids when we were teaching the love language quality time, and how when you give your full presence to somebody, it unravels people. It's a majority of people, I would say. Now, the people that aren't, it's like the best conversations ever. Like, hey, you're there. I'm here. What's up? And that's fun. So
Mhm.
I resonate with the eye contact.
Yep. So that was more from a chuckle perspective, but it does. It's such a useful visual is such a useful way to communicate. You pick up so many things about a person, from their eye contact. Like, oh, they're kind of uncomfortable talking to me. All of a sudden, that puts it into perspective what you're saying and how you're interacting with that person, knowing that they might be a little uncomfortable, or maybe they're super confident, or maybe they're just staring a hole through your soul, and you got to figure out why. All of these. I also listed empathy. I think that is I am a massive empath. So that's probably why I'm a little bit biased in this one, but there has to be some level of understanding what another person is going through for society to work. If we lose that ability, we lose a lot in terms of how we can interact and come to solutions and compromise in society. And then fulfilled. It's amazing how fulfilled I'll feel in knowing that someone trusted me enough to share something about themselves that maybe they held on tightly to or they kept close to the vest. Um, it's kind of a weird way to put it, but knowing that they deemed you trustworthy enough to share that information and to communicate with you like that
Mhm.
is very, very fulfilling.
Yeah, and one thing I want to bring up on that, and I didn't know where to put it, but I was hoping it would come up, is empathy is not about always knowing what the other person is going through. It's that you don't know and you go find out. You're like, oh man, something's wrong with Jake. I got to figure that out. Everybody spends so much time like learning about everybody's perspectives and like this or that, when all you have to do is just ask them. Like the easiest, simplest thing to do is you don't have to know. You just have to go sit with them and then ask and then listen. So I think we waste a lot of time in empathy games of sorts, apps or skills, when it really is as simple as just tell me what it's like from your vantage point. Like, why do we have to make it so complicated? Anyways, that's my
Yeah, it's not that it's that you care to know.
correct.
Hmm.
All right, let's go to list 3 and list 4.
Oh,
So get
okay.
that
Should I
pen.
do list two?
Oh,
I did list one, and then
oh,
I
okay.
got more.
Okay, hit
Imagine
me with the other ones.
imagination that stuck out to me because a lot of interaction with my friends brought forth a ton of imagination
Yeah.
another creativity. That was another one that you mentioned. Just taking the lid off of things that we could do or think about. It helped that we were in person, collaborating, could feed off one another. That one stuck out to me. Trust, which I think goes back to fulfilled for me. Inefficient because you know in today's digital age, we do a lot of communication through email and through chat. And I've noticed that it creates a lot of inefficiency in how we talk. Now, with that being said, we have a lot of inefficiency well, I shouldn't say that. I think in-person meetings reveal how inefficient we are at communicating. Because there's many
Yes.
times where you get into that meeting or and you sit there for 45 minutes and you're like, why did we have a meeting about this? Couldn't have this just been a call?
Mhm.
Well, we we communicate a lot better in person. That's why it feels that way. If you would have gotten on a call,
Mhm.
you probably wouldn't have felt that way, not because it was a shorter span. You probably would have taken the same amount of time, but you just would have been a lot more inefficient at your communication.
Yep.
So that is one of the biggest things. And let's take this into the sports world. As coaches, this is a big part in learning how to coach is being efficient with your words. Right? If the game is going on, you don't have 4 sentences that you can spout off to a child to communicate what you want to communicate. It has to be succinct and it has to be concise, right? Concise, not concise, concise. Um,
Yeah.
in practice, okay, there's a big thing, especially with soccer. I don't know how much it works with other sports, right? But in soccer, a lot of times as a coach, you'll freeze whatever you're doing and then you step in to make your point and to show your point. Well, the more you go in coach education, they start timing you in those. Like that's not
Mhm.
3 minutes for you to go on a soliloquy about
No.
um, how you feel at that moment. It is
Kids these days.
it is get in, make your point, get out, so that they have as much opportunity to play as possible. So, being efficient in communication. The last one I save this one for last is uncomfortable. Um, this was probably my favorite, and I think over the last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I have put myself in so many socially uncomfortable positions that I have learned to so appreciate this word and how much it's made me grow, being in uncomfortable conversations and being comfortable with them, and understanding that, you know, that's how true connection happens, is to say the things and listen to the things that you don't want to listen to or want to say. And that is such a powerful thing in communication and being a part of a team, is being able to say the thing that everyone knows needs to be said, but no one really wants to do it because, feeling might get hurt or it might be taken the wrong way or something like that. So I have a tremendous appreciation for the uncomfortability that conversation creates.
Bingo. And I'm gonna have to share this with you in like a, I should get like a, like a frame photo of a quote.
Mm-hmm.
But I've shared this with you before. As a person's success in life, Tim Ferriss, can usually be measured by the number of uncomfortable conversations he or she is willing to have. In-person conversations. Let me reiterate that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to list 3 and list 4. So get that pen handy. More ingredients of like what happens. What is conversation like? It is messy, give and take, rich, demanding, complex. You can't control it or can't control, no control. Spontaneous, slow, patience, tone/nuance. That was list 3. List 4, how to disagree, engagement. One that got brought up a bunch, awkward, innate, security, difficult, necessary, vulnerable, untidy. I guess I would go with messy, synonym. This one came up towards the end. Intimate, repetitive, in that we sometimes say the same things a lot, or we repeat our stories, and deeper or depth. So list 3 or list 4, you can combine them if you'd like. What stands out to you about conversation that we get that you like?
I wrote down messy. I think that one's interesting. Conversations can be all over the place, and that's what's so great about them. It's one thing to go down a rabbit trail by yourself and start going down rabbit trails with other people. It's amazing how many connections that you'll start making, and I think that's a ton of fun, personally. Tone, this is probably my biggest one of all of them, especially as someone with kids, especially as someone who's coached kids, that it's not so much what you say, it's how you say it. It makes all the difference. And it's something that, especially my oldest, who loves to, he has such natural born leadership instincts and desires. But when he goes to lead, man, it is the harshest sounding thing in the history of mankind. Like, dude, I got no problem with what you're saying, but how you're saying it, like, I want to revolt against you, right? So the tone that you have has so much power. One could argue it has more power than even the words that you're saying. If you can fully, I think empathy comes in this, but if you can fully grasp the situation of what's happening, it has a ton of impact. Okay, so I was watching Band of Brothers. My favorite, sorry if this is a spoiler alert, but it's old enough, so I think hopefully either you've watched it and you know, or you're not going to watch it. There's a scene where they are German armies on one side of the river, American armies on the other side, right? And word comes down that they want to do a patrol one night, okay? Meaning a group of soldiers had to cross this river in the middle of the winter, go into the German side, go into the German camp, pull out 2 prisoners and bring them back, okay? Okay, great. Sounds good. So word comes down, hey, they get selected. They go, they end up losing 1 man. They bring back 2 prisoners. Great. Word comes back down again that they have to go back again. They want them to do another one. Okay. And I believe he's a major at the time, who's leading the men there. Calls him in to debrief, lets them know, hey, they want another patrol guy. So they call him in to brief. And he starts giving the plan. And I mean, there's so many leadership things that I took from this, but he starts giving the plan, and he's laying out the plan, and he says, and I need you to be in bed at 10 o'clock because I need you well rested to tell the story of this is exactly how it happened. But like the matter of fact, like there's no room for discussion here. There's no like I'm standing up for you right now. You're not going to question this, and we're going to move on with you guys still alive. And it's just great. The men just kind of like, because nothing changed in his voice. It was just, this is the plan. And all the men kind of perked up like, what did he just say? What I thought he said? But there was no wavering in his voice. There was no, oh, we'll have room for discussion. This is what's best for you. I'm doing this. I'm taking the risk. We're moving on now. Ready, set, go. And it just took all question. It took all doubt out of anyone's mind. And so how we communicate, the tone with which we communicate, that is a hill that I will die on. It is so important. Even more than
well, no, to agree with that. So, I'm constantly thinking of like, how do you create context? Like the words context building has been on my mind a lot lately. Like creating spaces, avenues for people to do the thing that you really need them to do. So I would love, and this would be like a game you could play test, right? Where you take a phrase like you just described, right? And then you give people like, how do you say that? Like say it in different ways. Like say it with compassion, say it with cockiness, say it. So you, instead of saying like, let's teach empathy, like practice talking in a way that conveys the thing you're trying to do. And that becomes interesting because it's a recombinatory game, which would be endlessly hilarious, right? Because some of them would be comical. But I think it would be the inability, like, ooh, no, I think, if you're going to say that confidently, you say it like this. And I know that's probably like in a good speech class, like where you set your intention of how you say something. But like any skill or anything like with conversation, it just takes practice. But to be explicit about that fascinates me. And like you said, leaders read the room, like they understood, like in that case, understood what's being asked here and was able to pivot that in a way that produced an outcome that was compassionate and impactful. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of things going on there, but boiling that down to, I'm going to say this thing, which isn't as much of the issue as you said, but how I say it so it lands. Super interesting.
Yep. And it's just interesting how small of a deal he made such a big deal that it was. But he did it by his tone, right? He didn't like stop the conversation and change his tone. It was just giving him a brief as normally as he would. That I think brought it down a little bit. I think the other thing about this tone is being
keep going and then pick your fourth word.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm gonna coffee break this thing.
Sounds good. Look at that. I bore him so much he has to go get more coffee. No, the thing with tone is I'm such a sarcastic person that if we lose tone, I lose a lot of my sense of humor. I rely on that, and there's nothing more awkward than saying a sarcastic remark and the other person not understanding the sarcasm or the tone in your voice. So that's probably one. It's cold to me. The other two that I think are actually connected that I would talk on are awkward and vulnerable. Vulnerable is such an impactful way to connect with somebody, being willing and open. But I think oftentimes in conversation that comes about because we feel awkward and we don't like silences, which I found that silences in conversation are kind of a useful tool to get people to talk in good ways. But it creates this awkwardness, so people want to fill the void. And when they try to fill the void, they'll just say whatever is on their mind, or they might say whatever is hurting them in the moment or emotionally impacting them in the moment, and it leads to really good conversation. So I have come to, and this comes back to uncomfortable, but I really embrace the awkward parts and be okay with that awkward silence, because it does lead to things like vulnerability. I think it leads to all of the ingredients that you've brought up.
Yeah, and what happens according to the book is we tend to then go, if we have awkward or boring or anxious or whatever the thing that kids said, which is kids because it was us, that were the quotes, was we tend to turn outward instead of turning inward. Like we go out for stimulation, like gimme, gimme, gimme. Whereas when you turn inward or even within your conversation, it forces you to think and slow down and then come up with something new. And then if we're always going outward, we kind of just hover over the superficial, shallow conversation. Whereas when you do have those polls, you get so much deeper. And I think that was one of the words as well. Good call. All right, Jake. Well, I don't want to spend too much time more on the problem. Let's go to our second draft. Now, we focus everybody in. We cover kind of what the book's about. And we've done that with story, stats, and ingredients. That's kind of the case for conversations. You get all of those things when you have face-to-face conversations. And so I don't want to spend any more time on the problem. I want to move to the solution. So I want to label this segment or section. They call it segment in the radio business, right? Called Exploding Kittens and Revving, quote, Conversational Engines. Okay. So Exploding Kittens, I do got to explain myself. So Elon Lee is the creator of the company in the game Exploding Kittens. And somebody asked him like, hey, how do you make games? And he says, I don't make games to be entertaining. The game is not what I'm making. What I am making is an experience that forces an interaction. He said he wants the people to be the most entertaining thing in his games. So you have games like Exploding Kittens and Poetry for Neanderthals. And if you have played those games, great games, by the way, we have no sponsorship affiliate in that context. If you played those, that you have to do something, but then you have to interact with another human being. So as we talk about revving conversational engines, these next solutions, which we'll play in the pick and preach way, I'm going to give some that came up. And now they're not organized by type. None of that is here. It is just, here are some strategies and solutions that would foster that Elon Lee approved, trademark pending, conversational engine where we are going to interact by default when we get into these contexts. So when we think about athletics and what really lasts is relationships and those conversations, the memories, the stories we tell. So, Jake, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So in no particular order, I'm going to go about 5 at a time. You can pick what you like. The first one is there was the rule. So there's some rules that come up. Is in order to cancel, like let's say plans or not make it or whatever, you cannot send a message. You have to call. So in the case, it was this kid who was canceling on the grandparents. The grandparents were so excited, that kid was over there making a special meal, and the mother kept getting annoyed that the teenage son was being flaky. And so after he had to call and hear the disappointment in his grandmother's voice, he refused to cancel. Number 2 is scouting for. God, I think this would be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Scouting. So Jake, I could not even, this requires me to read. I could not imagine this, but I would say I'll take a harder line. I would scout for players who live in context, who converse a lot. You show me how a kid converses, and that's the player I want on my team. It's like a deal breaker. Let me read it to you for context. Some businesses explicitly screen for an ability to converse. A vice president at a large pharmaceutical company tells me her strategy for hiring new recruits. I'm imagining like you're scouting a player. It's very simple, she says. I have a conversation with them. Now, contrast that with 100 pages later. I cannot even believe this is a thing. Phone phobia, Jake. Players receive calls from college sports coaches who want to interview them. These are important calls. Duh. But the young men have their parents take the calls, and the college hopefuls, send a follow-up email. As soon as young people saw a real alternative to the telephone call, they found ways around it, usually email. The third one, just to give you some space to laugh at that, is really the adults. So the adults need to be the ones who are modeling, right? So adults need to model the behavior that you want. 121, it all matters. Okay. All family matters, and I would assume a team. This is another rule. 2 rules back to back. All family matters, team matters must be discussed in person, face to face. I'm not getting playing time. Send an email. I'm not this. We're fighting about that. All matters, parent, athlete, coach related. There's no discussion over your game, whatever app that you have to converse with your team. None of that happens. That would be the rule. And similar to that, right below it is no bedrooms. Having a team. This is a rule. If you're going to play for me, this is the rule. No electronics are allowed in the bedrooms. We have this thing called the dock, and it all has chargers and stuff. So, like at the end of the day, all of the phones and tablets and laptops, they all go there. The ritual of the dock frees the family up for talk. And for me, it would be that athletes sleep. Like if you have not slept, I don't even want you on the field. Like you are digging yourself a hole. And so you say you want to perform and then you do the exact opposite. So like having this ritual or rule in place. So the first 5, Jake, cancel. If you're going to cancel anything, you got to call. The scouting thing, adults just being good models of this. All matters must interact face to face, and like the rule of no phones or technology in your bedroom at a certain time of, like you cut it off at 10 or 9 or whatever it is. What stands out to you about those as solutions for encouraging and reclaiming conversation?
I love them all. The call to cancel. That used to be the thing.
Yeah.
Right. That used to be the thing. Like mom and dad would be like, "Oh, if you can't go to practice, you got to call coach and tell them." Like that's what my parents did. And I think there's a real power in that. Where now it's just like, okay, I'll just send them a quick message for you. It's okay. So I think that's really interesting. To maybe hammer down on that again as a coach I would be really curious to see how that worked. The part of it as a coach that I'll just be very blatant honest with you, like I don't want to have to take the time to take 3 phone calls before I get to practice even. But it would be interesting.
Or even leave a message, like a voicemail.
Sure.
That would be great. Like, hey, so
Sure.
you could call on your way home, be like, hey, sorry we missed you. Hope you're feeling better. Whatever it would be.
Right.
Get caught up on your homework. Yeah.
Yep. No, I get it. Scouting is interesting. The no bedroom. My wife was just telling me last night, she's reading the book. The impact, forget phones being a distraction from interacting with people around you. If we want to bring this to sleep, phones and the blue light that they emit don't allow your brain to truly enter rest. Right? It stops the production of melatonin, and it's not good. Like your body was designed to operate by the rising and settings of the sun in terms of knowing when to start and when to stop. And our phones and our technology have stopped that. So my next endeavor will be to figure out how to cut down screen time an hour before bed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that one is impactful in multiple ways. And then discussing matters. You said phone phobia. I never had it to the point where if a college coach called me, I'd make my parents talk. But like anytime I didn't have to get on the phone and call a stranger, I'm all for it. I'll be honest with you. Still into this day, quite frankly, because I personally do not like talking on the phone. That is probably my least favorite way of communication, just solely verbal. I will.
Yep.
I have no problem chatting. I have zero problem interacting with people in person. I just phone. I hate. I don't know if it's because there's a lot of misunderstandings that happen, or I can't see you, so it makes me uncomfortable. So the interaction of being face to face on any of those family matters would be very important to me. It's something that I might start implementing. You have an issue, please come to me. It always gets my wife fired up. Like I'll come back and tell her like, oh yeah, so and so has this problem or that problem. It's like, well, aren't they at practice every day? Don't they come watch their kid practice every day? I go, yeah. Well, they don't have the balls to tell you. Sorry, that's a vulgar way of saying it, but they don't have the chutzpah to talk to you face to face when they're there. They have to wait till they go back to. That's not helping, Kevin.
We just need this. I was thinking of like the word, like in biblical times, like gird your loins. You don't have the loins. Like, I just want to hear somebody say that. You don't have the loins.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way. I'm going to keep that. But yeah, they're there every day, but they won't talk to me about anything. So it's like, well, that's super weird.
We're gonna come back to that. So I want to pause on that one. So not the loins, the not talking. Um, so funny. Anyways, let's go to the second list because I do want to come back to that. So 6 through 11 is this. On page 44, it talked about sacred spaces, like in your house. Okay. So sacred spaces that our families can create, the living room, dining room, kitchen, the car, that are device free. Not that all of those have to be device free, but that an area. There's a really cool book. I forget the author, but it's called Hamlet's Blackberry. And that family had like a screen free Saturday, or there's like tabless Thursdays. Like there's all these things like where you would just have a time where it's like, oh yeah, from, Sabbath is the same idea. But we can plan for a future in which we design the design of our tools and our social surroundings encourage us to be at our best. And we learned that from James Clear. Like you have to design your environment to get the result you want, because otherwise it's just easy, right? The easy button's there. So 6 is sacred spaces. This one was interesting, Jake. The minimum effective dose for a conversation, like to give somebody time, is 7 minutes. So like allowing the awkwardness, the silence, like give something 7 minutes in order to see where it goes. Now, I'm not saying like cut off your conversation at 7 minutes, but like having like this arbitrary number in place to, be able to go with. Number 8 was eye contact. Just demanding that as one of your team norms when you address somebody. I think it'd be great like to have a team like when they address the officials or the other team or players, or when you interact, like as you go like to a town, like your players have like, hey, your players address people by their names, like use pleasantries and look people in the eye. Like that is cool. Making your space device free. I know that kind of goes with sacred spaces, but let's just say you have a practice. We don't have devices at practice, like not even in your bag. Like they stay in the car, they stay in your locker. I mean, I know that isn't always good, but or it's not always practical. But that's interesting. Like device-free times. Like if you have a barbecue, nobody has their device. Like you're welcome to come, but no kids will be on their device and no adult. Like leave your device in your car. What about an emergency? Then don't come. And that word emergency came up a lot and what that actually means. But number 10 is unitasking or single tasking. Just doing one thing at a time and training your athletes, training yourself to, I'm doing this conversation and then I'm going to do this. So don't do things. Multitasking is a myth, and that's already been proven. So I don't want to talk too much about that. Then this one, I wanted to talk to you, Jake. There's 2 of these, is having office hours. Like each week where you're just available to talk. I know you don't like phone conversations, but like in the college world, you can go see a professor, right? You go talk to them. I think it'd be really valuable if you were a teacher or some other, time where it's like, hey, I'm just here if you need me. And that was brought up in one of our other books too. So in review, sacred spaces, 7 minutes is the minimum effective dose, eye contact, device free, single tasking, and office hours.
I love those. First one I would say is sacred space. So this is a big thing in a lot of ways for me, but the importance of having a safe haven and a place where you can retreat to and not be bothered is so important. And it's really, where do we draw a line over what we want to protect? For me, I'd probably never tell kids that they can't bring their phone to practice, because like one of the most useful ways of a cell phone is to be able to get a hold of your parents, or your parents to be able to get a hold of you when they're not in your presence. Not a helicopter parent way, but like, hey, I got, hung up in traffic. I'm not going to be there for 10 minutes. Could they contact me? Yeah, they absolutely could. I don't want to, that's not a way that I want to tick parents off by separating them from their child by their only means of communication in those points. I'm not going to do that necessarily. Yep. Now, when we go to a team dinner, put your phones away. I don't want you guys sharing your Instagram stories with each other. Just put your phones away. And it's amazing how that is kind of the center point of everything that they're doing. Like even if they're doing it together, they're doing something together around their phone instead of around them as individuals and what interests them truly outside of this device. So that would be a time when I'd say, no, this is sacred space. This is our team space. Put your phones away. Leave them in the car. We're here to connect with one another, not connect with our phones. So that's a time that I would implement something like that. Office hours. This is what my wife tries to get me to do every season. Is just say if a parent wants to get a hold of you, they have to get a hold of you between this time and this time, because everything else is family time or it's your work time.
Yep.
Or whatever. So make it very clear cut. Like, hey, on Sundays from 5 to 9, you can call me. That's about it. Otherwise, you know what? I will stay 30 minutes after practice. I get there early to practice, to set up. Great opportunities to come talk to me. If it has to be by phone or outside of those times, then this is the window. I'll have my phone on me. I'll be paying attention to it. Otherwise, I got too much stuff going on, or I have other priorities in my life, right? Like my family, like my main job, perhaps, that do take priority.
Yes, and I remember you talking in previous episodes about having that opening period of practice, which is a little bit of free play. It's a great time. Parent drops the kids off. Just, you're welcome to come on the field. Come talk. Like, hey, we're just shooting the breeze here. I'm just watching. You're just watching. Come talk to me. I agree with that. The office hours is very interesting. And Cal Newport's a big fan, Tim Ferriss as well, about setting parameters for when you're available. And so Tim Ferriss did it in the 4-Hour Work Week, where he said, hey, like, I answer email like at lunch, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then after, like, you set periods very short. I mean, 12 to 1, and then you disable your email, and then they all come in. And then if anything else comes up that's urgent, they're expected to call you. Here's what urgent means. Like, you give people, like, it is literally our job to set boundaries for ourselves, our intentions, so that other people, like, you don't have to allow other people's lack of intentionality to affect your life. Like, they just assume you're always on call. That is not the case. And I think it takes at least one person to kind of go against the grain to be like, hey, this is how I'm prioritizing my time because I value A, B, C, my family, my sleep, my this. You're not going to get a hold of me. And that's okay. Like, it used to be when we had the phones on the wall that you had to call there, and or if nobody called you back. Remember, like, the little, whatever. The phones you had to, like, turn the thing. Like, if you were unreachable, nobody, like, thought anything of it. Maybe they're raking their yard. Maybe they're snowplow. I mean, not snow plowing. Plowing. There's snow. We have snow in Minnesota, so that is interesting. But I want to go to the next list for time's sake. Is 12 through 16. These ones are interesting because now we're getting places. There's a lot of good here, for the record. But I want to talk about one thing we're missing, which is conversational utopia. And I got to describe this. Do you remember way back in the teammates of the friendship section, they had it might have been the teammates, or it was Wooden and me. It was the teammates, where they said it was like 25 players and 25 cabs.
Mm-hmm.
And I see the equation now changing. Instead of saying 25 players, 25 phones. Like, you just don't have that glue. So I want to contrast that with what it could look like. Okay. Now, this comes from the world of economics, but it's Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Peace Prize, and his colleague Amos Tversky. I'm sorry if I offend anybody with that mispronunciation, but these two worked very closely together. I want you to hear this. This is what I imagine the engine looking like at its best in our context. So let me read. We spent hours each day just talking. When Amos's first son, Oren, then 15 months old, was told that his father was at work, he volunteered the comment, Abba talk Danny, which means they talk together. That's what his 15-month-old thought of work. We were not only working, of course, we talked of everything under the sun and got to know each other's minds almost as well as our own. We could, and often did, finish each other's sentences and complete the joke that the other had wanted to tell. But somehow, we also kept surprising each other. Conversation led to an intellectual communion. It's the best way to exchange information, and it developed a kind of intimacy. The goal wasn't to get there faster, but to go deeper. So that's one, is like imagining that. Because I see that with our kind of sacred space, like being the bus ride. Why are you on your phone during the bus ride? Like, it's like all those ingredients we're looking are completely out the door if you have kids who are just texting each other right next to each other. Like, there must be a point where you get on the bus, you become a player, and you leave all that at the door. Or maybe even it's a 50-minute ride, 15 minutes in, everybody put them up in the bag, right? Now we're a player. So that's number 12. Number 13, Jake, I thought you would like because you're a little bit more in the business realm than I am, but it's called the sociometric badge. Think like in earning a badge. But what it was is that is in a lawyer context, and that lawyers who spent more time with clients face to face brought in the most business. Now, how much lawyers socialize is a part of their performance review.
Mm.
So that if you socialize, you have sociability, you actually are more productive and turn in more profit. To sum up a large number of studies, face-to-face conversation leads to higher productivity and is also associated with reduced stress. It doesn't work for online encounters. What matters is being together face-to-face. So this idea of a badge that you have to earn, and then even further on in the work section, they talked about, have you had the sense of purpose conversation? Like, managers were expected to know what their employees' answers were to the answer, what is your sense of purpose? It's a box that had to be checked on their performance review. Knowledge about your colleagues that depends on face-to-face conversations has become a part of the company's, or I would say in our case, team's DNA. So that's number 13. All right, Jake, this one was funny. There was a company that wanted to collaborate and converse more, and they put in together a new program. This very shiny, elegant new program was called Breakfast. So Breakfast was the CEO said getting together for face-to-face conversations is good for the bottom line, and proactive leaders can do things to make it happen. So the CEO started a breakfast where they would all come to breakfast. They would come to the office 45 minutes earlier. They had no agenda. People would simply be there and available to each other. The breakfast group is uniformly enthusiastic about the program. At breakfast, problems are solved on the spot and new ideas get heard. Informal conversation counts. And what happened is scheduled meetings dropped by 20%. So the idea of food and breakfast, this is the last two that I want to get to, and we'll move on to our metaphors and most valuable ideas, is the idea of mentoring. Jake, this is the coolest thing. I cannot imagine this, and I regret I didn't do it, but that's probably why it's so hard to read. Do you remember your leadership council thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We need parent-teacher conferences regularly, like after every practice or game. So imagine this. We are all products of the conversations we have not had at home, the conversations we have sidesteps with family, friends, and intimates. When young people join the workforce, there's a new opportunity to show compassion and understanding of their histories. Showing up to a face-to-face mentoring session should not feel that it requires an act of courage. It should feel like business as usual. So let me pause there. I want to paint your picture. Remember you mentioned in another episode about you want the kid or the player to voice what they want out of the experience, and then the imagine if you rotated through your players. Now I understand that you can't do this in like football, let's say where you have like 100 players, but you could do that with position groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you regularly said, hey, it's Monday, it's your turn after practice to just sit and chat. The player, the parents or guardians, and you. Just, hey, like you have the sense of purpose conversation. What are you trying to get out? And you rotate through those catalog of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Super informal, like 5 to 10 minutes, nothing crazy. But scheduling that in at the end just blows my mind. Like, I've never heard of that. And I think it would be the ROI would be so big. So I'm going to wait on that because I got one more. The last one is way back in the beginning. And it just breaks me. Let me find it because I got to set up a little bit of the context. The best predictor of success later in life, Jake, for children is the number of meals shared with their families. In our positive associations to a family dinner, myth and science come together. So we have the conversational utopia, so the sociometric badge, the new program of breakfast, mentoring in the context of like, let's just say after practice or a game you meet with, each one individually, and then the family dinner. So in terms of revving the conversational engines and creating the context for interaction, what do you like out of that?
Food. Seems like food is
I
a good
love
conversational thing. What's quite interesting is how cultures have evolved around food and how food is such a tool to bring people together. It's really, really interesting. I find it fascinating how food is so cultural. And this highlights kind of why. It is a force to bring people together and talk and to be together and to food is essentially a distraction similar to a cell phone, but allows you to be distracted together, where a cell phone causes you to be distracted separately. So that is a very interesting idea. I love it. If you're a coach, if you're a parent, find ways to get your team around food together. I think that's the message that I would send to everyone. Unify them over food. It's a great way. The mentoring is certainly interesting. I mean, I know from a business world perspective, we do a lot of what we call one-on-ones with our employees. That would just seem to follow that train of thought, even into your teams. Now, there's a difference in having to do 17 one-on-ones as opposed to 5, kind of a deal. But there's ways to do it within practice. Even it's not something that you have to do outside of practice. Even within practice, is going on, just pull someone over. It's a 5-minute conversation with the player. Hey, how you doing? What's going on? I think could work. The utopias. It's an interesting one, right? And what it could look like, and what we should strive for. I appreciate this conversation in the sense that we could sit here and rail on how technology destroys a lot of things, but finding the solutions and having a dream for what it could look like is key, right? How do we come to a solution that conversation and communication amongst our teams, amongst our parents, coaches is happening in a way that really you can only envision, right, to get to that point. So that's an interesting one. I like all of these. I think there are a lot of good ones. The one I didn't really talk about that was interesting was scouting. And as you were talking, one thing that popped in my head is, what if you had the kids scout each other?
Well,
they would have to be old enough.
Yes.
But what if you just had them draw names out of a hat and say, okay, you got to do a scouting report of that player, and then you have to deliver it to them, not by piece of paper handing it to them. You have to go and tell them, like, here are the 3 things that you do really good. Here are the 3 things, and then how do you word it? What do you say? Here's the things you suck at. Or here's the things that you're... And quite frankly, people maybe lambaste me over this, but there are some people and personality types where it will be received better if they just come out and like, no, you suck at these 3 things. And they're the personality types that can be like, I'd really appreciate if you got better at these 3 things. And so just getting them to understand themselves, understanding how to communicate both good news and bad news is such a useful life tool. And I've never thought about it, but I kind of like that idea. I have to think about it a little more in terms of if I want to implement it, because I also don't want to open a door where someone's like, okay, and they get maybe the player that's not the most skilled, and it just takes 5 minutes of ripping the kid apart. Like, that's not the intent of it. But to open up a communication line between teammates of how to help one another, how to deliver good news and bad news, I think would be a really useful tool.
Well, and I like the randomness. So I'm a teacher by trade. You're familiar with zone 2 training, right? Where you jog and you can still have a conversation. I'm thinking of you have to couple or attach things to other things. So if you're a soccer team and you do that kind of jog around the field, instead of freaking out and be like, everybody sprint right out of the gates, it'd be cool to draw a card and say, hey, you're gonna our card today is, which would be funny because in soccer there's cards. Is say, hey, what's one thing that you're not good at and want to work on? And you have to share it with the person as you're jogging. And then you also draw another cards where it's you pair up or trio up, and then you have to talk with that person. And that all is random. The card is random. but then the pairing is random. And then when you come together after the warm up, you randomly call on a set. Okay, you, Jake, tell me about Kevin's weakness. What does he need to work on? What was your solution to that? Like, just so subtle. Like, I mean, it's not exhausting. We're not talking about like, changing your whole practice. You're there to learn skills, right? As well. But embedding that within, because they don't need to go harder than zone 2 for a warm up. It's called a warm up for a reason. But to bridge that habit or build that habit of talking, about everything is so interesting, because those little moments matter instead of leaving them to chance or whatever things the kids are bringing to practice, that baggage, or even they're in a society now that they don't practice this. So it's like, well, you can complain about it, or you can at least make practice be that one space and one time that we do things differently. You can't control what they do outside of that, and you're not going to. But you can show enough of a difference that be like, this is better. Like, what's different about that? So I agree with you. All the excuses, like we say, hey, don't have excuses. I think any excuse to bring people together is a good excuse. So
completely agree.
All right, Jake, 4 metaphors, and then I'll only pick a handful of most valuable ideas because there's quite a few. And then we'll finish with slow dance, and then the really sad part of the elderly and the seal. All right. Metaphor that you either come up with or the ones that were there. So conversation and cooperation is like what? So what would we compare this to? The first one is the engine. That came from Keith Sawyer, right? The more conversation you have, the bigger your engine is, the faster you can go. Okay, so if you don't build that engine valve by valve, I know nothing about engines, so I don't know what I'm talking about, but I assume if you have a bigger engine, a Hemi, you're going to go quicker than if you have maybe a 4-cylinder. Just my common sense, hopefully coming through. Number 2 is conversation is like a muscle. So on page 41, it's compared to a muscle. I know a lot of things are compared to muscle, but the idea that, you're just atrophied, it's not that it's not there. It's that it's innate. You just need practice. And that was the quote from the beginning, is that, my mom really doesn't know how to do this. Well, it's like, oh yeah, you just haven't practiced it in a while. So you can't just expect somebody to go do like a 450-pound squat. No, you'd start them low and just do the body weight version. And then you slowly build up the rigor, the complexity, or the intimacy. The number 3 is conversation is like yoga. So yoga, in the idea, I wrote down conversational yoga in that life is messy, conversation is messy, but we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. So if you've ever done yoga before, you get into this, pose, and then you have to sit there for some ungodly amount of time. And if the teacher is one of those ones, just 3 more breaths, and it's like 10 breaths later, you got to do that with conversation too. Let the silence do the work. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Last one is just contagious. And I don't want to really go disease related, but good conversation is addicting. So as much as our technology is away from us, once you've been around one of those conversations in face-to-face, that's the difference that technology cannot do. Simon Sinek said it in Leaders Eat Last. There's no such thing as virtual trust. So we have this artificial, superficial exchanges. When you get the real thing, it is so rich and so powerful that it overwhelms everything else. So it's like the paradigm he put in that book too, is like we're kind of stuck on endorphins and dopamine, the short-term drip of cortisol and feel-good stuff. But it's junk food compared to the oxytocin and serotonin that we really get from long conversations over a long period of time. So we have engine, muscle, yoga, contagious, or something even better. Anything you like from that?
I like the muscle one. I was going to say skill. It's a skill that needs to be trained. It needs to be practiced. It needs to be, it needs to fail. It needs to go through the ringer. Look, I think if you want to understand conversation, there's a reason why Joe Rogan has the most popular podcast in the world.
Agreed.
The dude knows how to converse and make the person across from him interesting. And asking questions, inputting of his own, but he doesn't just give like simple input. It's input that the other person can feed off of and run off of. Like if you want to understand conversationalist, a good conversationalist, just listen to Rogan. You can fast forward through the responses of his his guest if you'd like, but listen to how he forms questions, how he's taking from what the other person is saying and how he's engaging them, the audience trusts him, because I think in a lot of ways he's having a conversation that other people wish they were having with that person. Like there's a trust that's built, like, oh yeah, I'd ask that question, or oh yeah, I'd want to ask that question. So there's a couple out there, but Joe Rogan definitely comes to mind as the biggest one of being a good conversationalist.
Indeed. And I think all those traits that we described earlier would go with that. All right, now, some most valuable ideas. So what do we get from reclaiming conversations? So we're going to be more cooperative. We're going to go in a similar direction. The way we do that is we, build that the myelination of cooperation, like Jake said, the skill. So here's some things. Jake, tell me which one you like the best. Emphatic arts is the learning to make eye contact, to listen, and to attend to others. Conversation is on the path toward the experience of intimacy, community, and communion. Reclaiming conversation is a step toward reclaiming our most fundamental human values. That's the most valuable idea, number one. Number two is eyes to see and ears to hear. Okay. This is, let's see, down 23. All right, here. That got back to the one I mentioned before about the most endangered species, is that we have moments of more and lives of less, and that we need connection. It's down here. It says, it is when we see each other's faces and hear each other's voices that we become most human to each other. That was a good one. This one came from Turkle, page 25. She said, face-to-face conversation leads to greater self-esteem and an improved ability to deal or work with others. Again, conversation cures. Page 107. This is the fourth one. I like this one. This one, good to read. Okay. Relationships deepen not because we necessarily say anything in particular, but because we are invested enough to show up for another conversation. In family conversations, children learn what can matter most is not the information shared, but the relationships sustained. Page 124, our families need us. One of the most consistent lessons I have learned from studying families, and I would say teams, we have to be more compassionate with ourselves. We are vulnerable for our technology. Our phones exert a strong holding power, and we want to stay with them. But, Jake, our families need us. A couple more, and then you can tell me anything else you'd like to add. Is memories. This one was a good one. It says, this was from a girl. She said, memories don't happen when you get a text. It's the stories you can tell. She appreciates when you text a message, you don't mess up, but it's the funny moments come precisely from messing up and making mistakes. The best stuff is friends making mistakes together. If you're talking, you can mess up and it turns into something really funny. That's how people bond. It's not like everything is made to be perfect. It's like you should make mistakes, and you should, well, with friends, it's good to see their faces. Two more. 262. Don't know why you need to know the page numbers, but it just felt right.
Just so we know you're not making it up here.
Just so you know. All right. For Trip, and there's this one guy in here, the shared experience of people at a sit down is like nothing else. It's the best way to learn how your colleagues think, how your clients think. And he says, when people are comfortable talking to each other, little disagreements don't grow into big problems. You get the unexpected. You get chemistry. Even the most dedicated email exchange is not the same as face-to-face conversation. Breathing the same air matters.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's wrap up. I'm going to pick one of these two. Just double checking. All right, the family dinner. I got to, and then I'll do the most important job. The family dinner at your house is something created and built over time, or any of the solutions we gave. As you build it, you teach your children the problems need not be catastrophes. They can be talked through today and again tomorrow. It is a place to develop a sense of proportion. A child alone with a problem has an emergency. A child in conversation with a grown-up is facing a moment in life and learning how to cope with it. Life is not a problem looking for a quick fix. Life is a conversation, and you need places to have it. And lastly, the most important job. This one was hard to read. The most important job of adolescence and childhood is to learn attachment to and trust in other people. That happens only through human attention, presence, and conversation. So I'll leave you with the most valuable idea. Anything that stood out to you from those kind of big quotes? I mentioned that I was going to wander a bit. It was hard to pin down. But anything stick out to you before we wrap the episode?
I mean, the last one's heavy. I think it speaks for itself. I would, if I was in the audience, I would listen to that one again and just sit on it for a little bit. That was a big one. We've become a very debate-centric society, and I've come to the conclusion that I hate debates because they're not conversations. They are debates with little conversation happening, and you don't learn from that, especially in today's world. That's all. What did you put it? A lot of moments, less life, or something like that. All these debates are doing is looking for this one big gotcha moment that they can put on a 5-second clip. And I'm like, oh yeah, he won. No, like it should have been a conversation. Here's what I think. Here's what I believe. What do you think? Oh, interesting. And interacting with each other's ideas. It doesn't really happen in a debate. Everyone just has their own game plan, their own points that they want to make, and they stick to them. That's what I mean. Yep. There's political debates going on right now that I just find laughable. I've listened to plenty of other debates that are just they cringe because it's just one person going on a soliloquy and then another person going on a soliloquy, and doesn't leave true open conversation, which we are missing in a lot of ways. The only other thing I would add that we didn't really touch on is how important nonverbal communication is. Or maybe we touched on it, but we didn't really drill down on it. The amount of information you get from somebody just looking at them is you can't overstate it. Understanding their mannerisms, how comfortable they feel, how not comfortable they feel. To deliver bad news and look into someone's eyes is one of the hardest things that you can do. And we have oftentimes just been able to resort now to delivering any type of news without looking the person in the face. That's going to destroy any sort of empathy. It's gonna remove a desire for you to seek empathy and care, because you don't have to, right? You just, word goes out and then you can just forget about it.
Maybe this is too violent, Jake, but I swear if you break up with me over text, I'm going to come to Arizona and destroy you. To break up the YouTube and the podcast over text, unforgivable. Well, to go back to your point, do you remember? I have a twin, and you're aware. One thing that always got brought up is, and this was by osmosis because we're not like super close, is when you played with your twin or somebody you know really well, you can, to speak to the nonverbals, you can start to predict where they're going to be even without knowing it. Like you get this like unspoken thing like, hey, I get a look, I'm going to do the thing. And people always were fascinated by that because we were not great athletes, but every once in a while you get in a good spot. And you score, like, how did that happen? Like, well, why did you do this? And so I worry sometimes that our technology is not building up those circuits that we can build with our teammates to perform better. Like you need to like understand the mannerisms. So if you're so cortisoled out on your phone, you don't have any restrictions or boundaries, you're literally like have a ceiling on your performance, not only personally, but collectively. So when we sit and like harp over, like, what does this have to do with sports? Everything. If you have all, 25 different phones and 25 different players, you think you're going to have any semblance of chemistry? Good luck. Like, I mean, people say they want chemistry, they want performance, they want this, and they do the exact opposite. And I get it. Just you can't have it either way. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the nonverbals are huge. It did get mentioned like with the tone and the velocity. So it was there, Jake, but it wasn't elaborated.
We didn't really drill down on it. Yeah. And it's one thing that I'll do with my teams is I'll have them, do kind of a passing activity, but I won't allow them to use their voice. Mm-hmm. So they have to figure out how to communicate not using their voice. And you'd be surprised what kids can come up with on how to communicate that they want the ball without saying, I want the ball. It's pretty funny, but it's a great exercise for them to understand how much we feed off of body language and what it can ultimately communicate to one another.
Yeah. I want to end with this. As we talk about cooperation, conversation being the engine, reclaiming conversation. I've only cried in a classroom less than a handful of times. Okay. One was in The Outsiders. Another was a scene in The Giver, because I read a lot of the books out loud. Sometimes we didn't have enough books, so you just have to read everybody out loud. I don't know when I read this, and it came up somewhere, and I don't know. I just remembered it. But I want to talk about the slowing down. So this is a poem, and Jake, you can add to it if you like, but we're going to end with this. It's a poem called Slow Dance by David L. Weatherford. And I promise not to cry, but I might. Who knows? And it really speaks to this idea of cooperation and the value of, the people around you right there, and savoring. I like that word, savoring those things that really last. I mean, we talk about what lasts in athletics. Well, I think this one gets to it. So I'm going to read it with all the gusto I can, but it's called Slow Dance by David L. Weatherford. Have you ever watched kids on a merry-go-round, or listened to the rain slapping the ground? Ever followed a butterfly's erratic flight, or gazed at the sun into the fading night? You better slow down. Don't dance so fast. Time is short. The music won't last. Do you run through each day on the fly? When you ask, "How are you?" do you hear the reply? When the day is done, do you lie in your bed with the next 100 chores running through your head? You better slow down. Don't dance so fast. Time is short. The music won't last. Ever told your child, "We'll do it tomorrow," and in your haste, not see his sorrow? Ever lost touch? Let a good friendship die because you never had time to call and say, "Hi"? You better slow down. Don't dance so fast. Time is short. The music won't last. When you run so fast to get somewhere, you miss half the fun of getting there. When you worry and hurry through the day, it's like an unopened gift thrown away. Life is not a race. Do take it slower. Hear the music before the song is over. One of my favorites, Jake. And as I think about how short our season is with our own kids or our athletes, I found myself, that was probably why this book was so hard to read for me, is hypocritical, and being guilty of the very things that I don't want, and knowing my own vulnerability in this space, and charging myself, and I would say charging our listeners. It goes so fast, and I'm moving so fast along with it that I don't want to miss those things. So when it comes to conversation, that is really what you're after, and the people you get to share those things with. Any thoughts before we take off on the poem or the cooperation conversation in general?
Nope, that was beautiful. I think that was a very fitting way to end. Slow down, engage with the people around you. They might just surprise you.
Boom. All right, everybody. That is number 3 of cooperation in John Wooden's Pyramid of Success. We talked about reclaiming conversation, the power of talk in the digital age. Do check out the other 2 episodes that we've recorded. Group Genius by Keith Sawyer. That was all encompassing of cooperation. Number 2 was Ego, which is Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. That talked about removing ego from the equation. This one was obviously on conversation. And next, we're going to talk about Reality is Broken, which is all about games. So this context that we are most social and cooperative when we are in a space of games. And we'll go back to Jane McGonigal's first book about how to create spaces that people can really cooperate together. And that is the most cooperative space that I know of. So we're going to go look at that before we wrap up our final one on cooperation. But thank you for listening. Thank you for learning or conversing along with us. We appreciate it. Never stop learning. And be just a little bit slower than you probably were yesterday. Jake?
No, it was awesome. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks, everybody. Hope you're well and stay well.
See ya.